Welcome to Horror Makes Us Happy, the podcast where we ask the question, what is it about horror that makes us happy? Your hosts are Steve Becker and myself, Chris Whitman, and you can find out more about us at our website, horrormakesushappy.com. Before we get started, this is the trigger warning. We're going to be talking about messed up stuff, possibly described as another moniker in a moment of the non-PG writing. Writing?
Yes.
There's a Freudian slip because our guest today is an author. But before we get into that, to finish the disclaimer, we will be talking about things involving horror culture, which could involve anything from child abuse, suicide, rape, foul language will be spoke. So if that's not your cup of tea, go listen to something boring, as I usually say, or for a more courteous, mature, maybe think on it for a moment and maybe listen.
Proceed,
or just proceed. Do collect $200 and go directly not to jail and enjoy this episode of Horror Makes Us Happy. So as usual, talking about our guest coming up, we're going to be speaking with Miguel Rodriguez, organizer and I believe founder of Horrible Imaginings Film Festival. Don't quote me on that. Also Rebecca Reinhardt, actress in such works as The Embalmers, Fright Vision, and Sister Krampus. But today, we have the company of author Kathe Koja, who has written such works as The Cipher, Strange Angels, and Buddha Boy. Welcome, Kathe.
Hi, Kathe.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. So in this interview, as we mentioned before we started recording, the theme is basically going through your childhood, adolescence, and adult years, trying to tease out what it is that you like about horror. But that said, it's not meant to be a therapy session, so if there's any questions you don't want to answer, just say pass and we'll move on. But what are some of your earliest memories about scary things or, horror in your childhood?
Probably the strongest horror memory. I remember my sister taking me and a bunch of my cousins to the drive-in to watch the new spooky movie, Night of the Living Dead.
Okay.
And
original black and white, huh?
Yeah, back in the day, there was no way to know what we were seeing. And she started out saying, you guys stop cutting up, stop laughing. Everybody, calm down. We're going to watch this movie. And by the end, we were all crammed into the front seat of the car. And a couple of us, I think, were crying. And I remember watching that film and the hero has done everything right. And finally, the authorities come and things are going to be okay. And they straight up shoot him in the head. And the takeaway, the racism flew over my head because I was a kid. I was a white kid. Yeah. And that flew over my head. But the absolute shock of the injustice taught me everything I needed to know about authority figures and was probably the best lesson you could ever give a child. Do not trust authority. They are not there, be wary of authority because you have to parse it out and see if they have your best interests in mind. But that kind of falls away. It was the heart of the film that stayed with me. I remember reading Dracula when I was 10. I loved it. I thought, wow.
Like Bram Stoker's original?
Yeah.
Nice.
And it was this great Signet edition too, with this, fucked up cover where it looks like a bat or it looks like a skull. Super cool design. Mm-hmm. And I remember reading this and thinking, again, it was not something that I could articulate at that age, but the idea was, well, this is about hunger. This is about who gets to eat whom, who's at the top of the food chain, whose hunger signifies and whose does not. Mm-hmm. And why are we afraid of that? Why does hunger terrify us? Is that like an atavistic thing? Does it come from being eaten by large beasts at night, or are we afraid of each other, or what? So,
I would say it's primal. Hunger is one of the first few emotions and just feelings that you ever experience. So, yeah, I would say it's nature in that case, as far as nature versus nurture.
But you experience it from the inside out.
Right.
And this very much Dracula's hunger is presented from the outside in. And he's,
okay.
He's the bad guy. He's the hunger we have to guard against, right?
Yeah, it's not your hunger; it's someone
Right.
else's.
It's somebody wants to eat you. I do as well as write. I create immersive events, and I did one based on Dracula. I adapted Dracula for this event, and the image that I used in the poster was a fork. And the tagline was "Appetite must be fed." And the conceit of the show was you going to this dinner with Dracula where he is interviewing, what's his name? The guy, Jonathan Harker. Jonathan Harker is having his job interview with Dracula, and you are there. You're there at the table. So the idea that you are no longer at the top of the food chain is very disconcerting for human beings.
Mm-hmm. Please tell me the fork was pointed downwards.
It was.
Okay, good. It would only make sense, especially if it was a 2-prong fork.
Actually, it was a 4-prong fork. It was a salad fork, which was our little joke.
Instead of it being vegan.
Actually, we had food on the premises, and it was vegan food. Everything in the installation was available for people to interact with. And so we did have vegan food available just in case somebody decided to eat the food that was there.
I was just pointing out the fact that Dracula wouldn't be vegan, but yes.
No, he would not.
No, blood's not very vegan.
No. Okay, so yeah, two strong influences right off the bat. We may be able to end the call early. What else you got from childhood?
What else you want? Those are pretty good.
Yeah, I know. That's exactly.
They're pretty good. I used to read a lot of the anthologies, and a lot of them were, oddly geared towards middle grade readers. And some of the stories in there were pretty sharp, and they were stranger maybe than things that might be allowed today, or that might be, something that was meant for kids. But I remember reading tons of those uncritically, and just, soaking it all in.
Different guests have gone through different journeys, obviously, in their lives. Would you say that you were already starting to be a fan of horror in your early years, or did that not come until later?
I have never really thought in terms of genre ever in the things that draw me. I tend to go for things that the voices are very strong and indelible, and I read for voice. I like watching films where there's a strong director, or there's a strong narrative presence, guiding the film, where you're being told a story by someone. It's not, something that was put together out of, an identikit. I just like things that are strong.
Okay.
And I was thinking about this before our talk today, and, the title "Horror Makes Us Happy." It's like, what about strong, dark, disturbing, or violent things? What could possibly make us happy? And the answer I got came out of a memory, not a childhood memory. Some years ago, about 10 years ago, a family member was very, very ill and was in the ICU. And this was a situation that had been going on for some time, and things were quite sad. And I remember standing in the hallway waiting. There are only a couple people allowed at a time in the ICU to visit. So we were standing in the hallway waiting our turn, and, kind of talking like you do, and how are you, and, relative talk. And at one point I turned to the other people who were there and said, "This is just horrible, isn't it?" And everybody's face relaxed, and everybody started to talk again, but in a more open and urgent way, because we had all acknowledged in that second that this was really bad, and that somebody that we cared about was in big trouble, and there really wasn't anything we could do about it except kind of offer our presence and just be there. That was all we could do. And maybe that is appeal is not the word I want. Maybe that is the benefit of all dark fiction, dark art in that sense, is that it acknowledges that things can be really, really bad, and that those things are true. And you're granted the relief, right, of being acknowledged. That's being acknowledged. saying, yeah, I know what is happening now is terrible. I know there are monsters. I know there are things that are beyond your control out there in the darkness. But if we can acknowledge that, at least we have the comfort of truth going forward.
Mm-hmm. Like the comfort of knowing, understanding something, so it makes it more relatable, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Well, like what you just said about maybe you won't be able to do anything about it. That's exactly where I was going to go with that, is that you can't necessarily do anything about it until you identify what the problem is. And, you're identifying it as, isn't this horrible? Now that you've identified it, okay, now what do we do about it? And in some cases, the answer is there's nothing we can do, or there's nothing we can do about that, but here's what we can do. And then you focus on the things that you can do.
Right. And it gives you a place to stand, right? You're like, okay, we've acknowledged that our home is ringed by monsters. All right. It's not just a funny sound. We're not imagining it. The place is infested. All right. What are we going to do? What can we do? And at least it gives you a place to stand. That sort of bottomless tumbling where you're not sure, that to me makes the most disturbing kind of dark fiction or dark narrative, where there is no place to stand. You're never really sure. Is this really happening? Is it not happening? Are those monsters, or am I just imagining it?
So if you wouldn't say that you were a fan in your childhood, then did you even know that kind of material was meant to be entertaining?
Well, I was entertained.
Well,
there you go.
So, yeah,
Proof
I guess
in
so.
the pudding.
Right. That's what's so great about being a young reader, and why young readers should be allowed to read uncritically, because that's when you're developing your shit detector, right? When you're a kid, you read anything, you will watch things, you'll read things, and you start to develop for yourself the idea, is this something, do I like this? Is this good? Do I like it? Do I want more of it? And you kind of naturally gravitate towards the things that you like, or the things that you don't like, you just don't pursue them. You don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, going, well, why didn't I like? You just don't ever do it again, right? You never read it again. Mm-hmm. I think that all readers have receptors for various kinds of art. And when you meet something that hits your receptors, you generally know it. What's interesting is where your receptors can retain an artist or a writer or whatever throughout the course of a lifetime. And there are very few, right, that you can continue to follow and that are still relevant to you from, day one to day whenever.
On that topic, not only am I wondering what artists or authors or what have you would fit that title, I'm also wondering what it is about the media that they created that hit your sensors.
That's a good question. I think, again, it's intensity. One of my favorite books on earth, possibly my favorite book, is Wuthering Heights. And especially there was another book I read when I was 10. And what's interesting too about Wuthering Heights and Dracula, just from a technical standpoint, is how modern both their approaches were. It's a very fragmented narrative in that sense, and it relies on you to make the connection. And which is, I think, is a great achievement for Bram Stoker as a writer. That's pretty cool. And same with Emily Bronte. Wuthering Heights was the first book I ever read where I suddenly realized, like a clap of thunder, that the narrator was lying to me. And I'd never understood the idea of the unreliable narrator before. And it blew my mind. It's like, Nellie's a liar. I know she's lying because I can see she said XYZ, but when I look back, I am only seeing XY. It's like, then you start thinking, well, wait a minute, how much of this book is a lie? How much, I've been led up the garden path to believe certain things. So what else might not be true? So also work that asks a kind of involvement of me. And I always try to offer my own readers this, and people come to my events, same thing. I don't like things that are super easy and that are, if I don't have any work to do, if there's no involvement for me, then I'm liable to not stay interested. if a piece of art is asking me to kind of have a conversation with me, and a conversation between equals. It's not saying sit back and I'll tell you a tale. It's like, let's talk about this. Let's examine this monster. Let's look at this. Let's go out on these moors, whatever, and let's figure this thing out. That draws me and continues to draw me, and that can operate and does operate, and that's how you know art. It's art because it lasts and lasts forever. It continues to operate no matter where you meet it. The 10-year-old me who read Wuthering Heights is not the same as the 62-year-old me who can read it. It will tell me different things because I can meet it right in a different place. Same with certain pieces of music or certain visual artists or films. You can keep going back to them because they can keep meeting you where you are. And that's hard to do. That's real hard to do.
I'm curious, you talk about this thing about her being an unreliable narrator and how this was a big thing for you. It's interesting because it's almost a dichotomy between what you said a minute ago about liking strong voices and the narrative presence, although I could see how maybe she was a strong voice. It's just that she was unreliable. Whereas, do you see where I'm going with that?
No, keep going.
Yeah,
Keep
I'm going to.
So you had mentioned earlier that you liked strong voices, a strong narrative presence, being told a story. It sounded like you were saying, like the expectation was that it was what the narrator was telling you was true. Like, this is what's going on, A, B, C, D. And now you're pointing out that this book was very impactful to you precisely because it was not reliable. So did I misunderstand your previous statement?
No. Where is the linkage? I mean, that's a question. I guess I don't understand the question.
I'm just pointing out that it's interesting that you said you liked this thing, and now you're saying you're liking something that's, I think, seems to be the opposite.
No, not at all. Not to me anyway. The strength of the narrative is in, or one of the strengths of the narrative is in that twist, right? Where you've invested your thoughts and your beliefs in the story is unfolding this way. But when you realize that the story could, in fact, it could be a completely different story, that makes it all the more engaging because Emily Bronte was also writing, an explosive narrative way, because the story of Wuthering Heights is being told. We are the viewpoint character, Mr. Lockwood, is this guy who shows up. He's a tenant at this manor house, and he's a complete outsider. So he meets this fucked up family, which is what is so great. The beginning of this book, everybody in it is terrifying. You're like, he is like a puppy in a wolf den. He has never met anybody like these people. And he then becomes ill and has to be, kind of nursed back to health or whatever by this unreliable Nellie. And she sits there and, unfolds this tale to him. But we're really hearing it. We're Mr. Lockwood hearing it from her, right? And as it goes on, that's why everything is there. I mean, she plays completely fair with you. Everything is there. There's another book that I can think of that gives you a kind of the same experience. Sarah Waters' Fingersmith, which has been made into films, and I think there's a BBC production that I haven't seen. But that is also a book that plays completely fair, but there's a moment where you see everything revolve in a completely different way. And I remember reading that the first time and literally laughing out loud when I saw what she had done. That's real hard to do. And it was beautifully done. And it's the same. You are feeling very much the strong voice is giving you, a strong authorial voice, right, is giving you this story, and they're in complete control of what they're doing and giving you this. And you're reacting to it, and your own reactions can be equally strong because it's like, oh, I was fooled, or, oh, I didn't understand, or, oh, now I know. That's riveting. That's a dialogue between you and a piece of art. That's pretty great.
Yeah.
You sound dubious. Are you dubious about that? That was a very dubious.
No.
Well, sure, but
I would say it was a flippant, yeah.
Was it flippant?
No,
Was it flippant?
No. I'm still just trying to wrap my head around these two things that they kind of seem opposites to me, and I'm just trying to see where they connect. I mean, in both cases, it's about an authoritative voice, but you're also enjoying the fact that there was something unreliable there, but that you figured out that it was unreliable, and
think of it like the meta voice of the person who's really telling us the story is Emily Bronte, right? And so that's the voice that we hear in the film Pan's Labyrinth.
Mm-hmm.
You know how you don't know if the fawn is good or bad? Mm-hmm. You can never be sure. Same thing. You have to make your own, and the whole entire, that's probably my favorite of all his films. And I think he's a fantastic filmmaker. I would watch anything that he did. But you have to decide for yourself. And that's a huge moral fable too. It's one of the greatest examinations of human cruelty that you will ever see on a screen. It's very difficult to watch for that reason. But you never know if that fawn is good or bad. You never know what really happened to the little girl. You have to decide. You're asked to, participate in the story by this great voice, Del Toro's voice, telling you the story through the person of, the characters in the fawn.
Again, I'm laughing because this is another example of sort of a dichotomy. We were talking about how you liked strong voices because, vagueness can be scary. And here you've given an example of something that you like because it's vague.
But I don't think of that as vague. Scary. I don't think of it as vague at all. There's no, you are being asked to participate, but there is very much a feeling of, you can believe the fawn is good. You can believe the fawn is bad. I don't think there's vagueness of intent, right? I don't think that Del Toro's like, well, I just put a bunch of stuff together and, y'all figure it out. There's very much a strong driving narrative intent behind that story. And
yes, but it sounds like the intent was to be vague and let you choose what you want to choose.
But that's not being vague. That's offering you a choice. Being vague is not knowing if there is a choice, right? It's like, well, here's a bunch of stuff I put together. You figure it out.
Passive and the opposite of passive.
Active, right?
Active,
right?
Like, passive and active, unknown. Passive is being vague, like, yeah, you figure it out. But active would be like, no, I want you to figure it out because that's fun.
Right. I want you to figure it out, and more than that, I want you to participate in it, because without the audience's active participation, art is nothing. When I used to do school visits for my YA books, sometimes I would take one of my books and just throw it on the ground, and the kids would go, they always went, like, what are you doing? And I'm like, that is a book without a reader. It's nothing, right? It's just an object. The whole point of a book is for you to read it, for you to participate with it. Otherwise, it doesn't exist without an audience. So the strong voice is never afraid of your participation. It invites it. And the same way that when my own work is being read or reviewed or whatever, I'm always pleased when the reactions are strong, for good or bad. Readers don't owe writers anything, right? People don't owe me reviews. People don't owe me anything. And if they are willing to pick up a piece of my work and engage with it, I'm very happy. If they don't like it, that's more than fine. That's their reaction. I respect that. Mm-hmm. But that they had some kind of an exchange with it, that's what I'm always going for.
I'm looking at some of our other questions, which are typically more geared towards horror-related stuff, like, did you participate in Halloween? And
we can go there. That's fun.
Yeah, it's always a fun direction. Did you participate in Halloween as a kid?
Hell yeah. I love Halloween. Answer. No, I love Halloween. I hope that I know because of the plague, these last years have been really tough for families to decide on, what is a good safe way to continue the tradition. But I sure hope that it does, because I can't think of anything more fun than being a little kid and running around in weird clothes demanding people give you stuff. I mean, how great is that? How fun is that?
The combination of the two awesome things, right? It's like, no, you don't just get to dress up as crazy stuff. You also get to demand people give you candy.
And they do, right? And they do. That's the best part. You go up to someone's house and just scream at their front door and they come out and give you a Hershey bar. What could be wrong with that, right? That's awesome. No, I love Halloween. And
if only the rest of the year was so nice.
I know, right? And if only, I hope that it will survive in some way, and that kids will still be able to, do that, because it's also the joy of misrule, right? And you get to start thinking, what am I going to wear? What am I going to be?
Did you have a favorite costume when you were a kid?
No, and I'm not super crafty, unfortunately. Like, I'm not the kind of person who would put together a really cool costume. That's just not me.
No, it doesn't have to be a favorite because it was the best designed.
No, and I don't remember any of them, so probably not. Okay.
How about a least favorite?
I remember nothing. So I can't tell you. I don't remember.
Okay.
That's fair.
It was worth asking. Did you have any scary dreams, any reoccurring dreams when you were a kid?
No, but I remember having scary dreams after reading some of those horror anthologies. And there's one, and I don't remember the writer's name. The story is called Thornley Abbey. And it's about, there's some haunted nun, or nun's bones are creeping around the hallway. And I remember being really afraid of that. And that these bones would just suddenly, start strutting down the hallway. And that's all I remember. But I remember having nightmares and my parents going, you probably shouldn't read those books. I'm like, yeah, no, that's not, we're not going to do that. That's not the cure for this, right? That's not. But those kinds of, when things become part of your subconscious like that, that's really great. What a great thing to have a piece of writing or a film or whatever. And I'm sure we all had nightmares after Night of the Living Dead. I don't remember it, but I know there was great discussion in the extended family how my sister was no longer allowed to take us to the movies. So
you touched on enjoyment, which was something I wanted to ask about earlier. Obviously, you're talking about this shock in Night of the Living Dead that was not very enjoyable, but was there other stuff in that movie you did enjoy? Or, what did you enjoy about reading Dracula? Like, where was the enjoyment part of it?
Probably in reading more than in the film, because in the film, everything is colored by that last, moment for me. Right. And it just, and that's another narrative too, that kind of flips around, right? It completely turns your expectations on their head, because usually when the hero wins, he wins, right? Mm-hmm. But not in that case. Probably in Dracula, and to and as Wuthering Heights too, because I think Wuthering Heights is one of the great ghost stories of literature, and I don't often see it categorized that way. But literally everybody in that novel they're completely unsurprised by supernatural happenings. They're not surprised by ghosts. They're not surprised by dead people coming back and scratching on the window saying, let me in. No one's like, Lockwood, you're fucking crazy. Everyone's like, ooh, well, we don't talk about that. Mm. So that acceptance of there being another dimension to, the material world, I've found very enjoyable, and I do still. And I think that's why we like fairy tales so much, and why we believe them when we're kids, because they're telling us something true, right? They're telling us that the things that you see are part of the world, but they're not all of the world. And that feeling of, wow, there's a whole nother dimension to this experience of living that you can maybe only find in the dark. That's pretty enjoyable.
Acceptance of other dimensions as real.
And as a component, right, of reality, and saying, okay, what if there were vampires? What if there were, nuns' bones rattling down a hallway? What if these things were true?
How is affirming this other dimension as real beneficial?
Well, it enlarges your experience of being alive, right? when kids are not allowed to play, that's bad for them. When literally it's harmful to children if they're not allowed to play. Make believe, playing, imagining things. That faculty is so strong in us when we're little, right? We're able to slip seamlessly from one world to the next. And especially when it's an experience created among a group, it gets even stronger, right? Because you have to decide on the rules. Like, well, if the floor is lava, is the carpet lava or is just the floor? And so you're really creating that whole world by your participation. And that's what fiction does too, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about that when you were talking about, that's the interesting thing about kids doing this is that they're able to, as you're saying, create rules, but also disregard ones.
Yes.
With equal abandon, shall we say.
Sure. And that gives you an immense power too, right? It's like, no, this thing is what I say it is. That floor is lava. The carpet is okay. And the power of that imagination. And that's why investing who's ever watching the film or who's ever reading the book, whatever, in participation makes it 1,000 times more powerful.
Was there ever a time in your childhood where you were actually terrified of something in real life?
Yeah, we're going to pass on that.
Okay. Probably pass on the next question then too, because the follow-up is whether or not it introduced any or triggered any existing fears that has moved with you through life, shall we say.
And I think I will say this, that I think generational trauma is a thing that, as we learn more and more about it, in some ways it only confirms how deep a shared imagining in that sense can go, that you can be affected by things that may not have happened to you personally, but they did still happen to you.
Yeah. Or things that 20 years later are happening or are rules in the household because of something that happened that a new person into the household would have no clue about and have no understanding of why the rule is what it is. But
right. Why don't we ever talk about that? Or why don't we ever go see XYZ? It's like, no, we just don't do that. How do you address fears especially fears in children? Because they can be, like you said, they can be debilitating in the short term, and then they can leave a real scar, a living scar going forward. It's like, this is why I'm afraid of waterfalls, right? Or whatever. It doesn't seem like it seems like an irrational fear until someone learns the basis behind it.
Right. And that's kind of where I was going with the question, is saying, even if you don't want to talk about the cause of it, has there been an irrational fear that has gone with you moving forward?
No, but I have other irrational fears that I don't seem to have any cause for, unfortunately. But
I think that's true for everybody. Yeah.
Isn't it funny too that people will have these little triggers and you might not even know why? Or, or a friend will say, "Oh,
we may not even know why."
Right. I can't do that, or I can't go there, or whatever. Like, okay, it's clear that it's a hot button. We'll just, we'll stay away from it. But yeah, there are, and it shapes behavior too, right? It really shapes behavior.
It absolutely does. Yeah. Because you don't want to even talk to yourself subconsciously about what the fear is. You just kind of know that, no, I do not like that. Don't want to go any further into that.
Right. And you're whistling past the graveyard every time the thought pops up, right? It's like, la, 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 la. We don't talk about that. Keep going. Right.
I like that analogy.
Whistling past the graveyard. Yeah, I like that one.
And it's so fatally easy to really scare children. And which is why, lying to kids is probably as low as you can go. You want to offer the amount of truth that they're asking for, but you don't lie to a kid.
Elf on the Shelf, harmless.
Can you imagine what kind of a sick fuck thought that was a good idea? Honestly.
A voyeur.
I know, right?
Right. Well, I mean, they say, Santa sees you, so that's voyeur too.
Also fucked up.
But Santa, but I never thought of Santa as being like, the voyeur aspect never, ever was part of my conception of Santa or that, because of the idea was, plus he comes from a real person. It's like there was actually this Bishop Nicholas that went around giving out toys and whatever. So, but yeah, that idea of you being, some people, that's what they like about God, that he's like the sleepless eye, right? That's constantly making sure you don't do anything wrong.
the way you started to describe that, I thought you were going to go into describing Sauron's eye.
Well,
Yep,
exactly,
that's the first
but
image
that's
came
what
to my
it's
mind,
like,
too.
right? This big sleepless eye, and then you tell kids, "Oh, but God loves you." Wait a minute, you're giving me cognitive dissonance when you tell me
Exactly.
that this staring eye of Sauron is actually my friend. Something's wrong with you. You're not
abusive
giving me
household.
right the whole tale here.
Yeah. I do this because I love you.
Exactly,
He
right?
just loves you that much. He can't take his eye off you. Just, hey, what are you doing?
I know, right? It's like the ever popular, I'll give you something to cry about. No, I'm crying now. I'm really good. Okay. Say that.
Good. So let's move into teenage years. What were some of the scary stories or books or movies that impacted you during your teenage years?
That's when I sort of became aware of Shirley Jackson in my adolescence. And I, in fact, still have the old paperback of Come Along With Me, which is the last published work of hers. It's all short fiction, and it has the beginning of her last novel. And I didn't come to a lot of her novels till I was much older, but that was kind of a more, grown up step into dark or disturbing fiction. And a lot of her fiction too turns on that axis of what is real and feeling unmoored, feeling lost, feeling not even abandoned, but like the world has kind of receded from you and everything is against you. And it's very powerful and it's extremely creepy. And I think Stephen King, I don't know if it's The Shining, I don't remember which of his books, that he dedicated to her and said to Shirley Jackson, who never had to raise her voice, which is true. She never does. She's not going to give you the gross out scare. She's not going to, go for the shock, but she can, put a stick into your psyche and just kind of stir it around and give you that kind of feeling of dread where the floor is falling away and you don't know where you are. So she was probably the strongest voice, the strongest influence that I can remember from those years. And later, when there was Anne Rice, I read Interview with the Vampire. And again, that's another super strong voice, this narrative voice that just kind of sweeps you up and takes you away.
Mm-hmm. Always good in a piece of literature when the narrative voice is just that strong. Like it absorbs you into the story. You're no longer reading a book. You're listening to this person tell a tale.
Not too long ago, I was rereading The Haunting of Hill House, which is probably my favorite scary book in the world. And I was reading it in my own house, like at 11 in the morning with the sun pouring through the windows. And my husband came in unexpectedly in the room and I screamed it through the book. Because that's what she could do, right? She can.
That is effective. Yes.
Oh man. And I've read this book 10,000 times too. It doesn't matter, right? I was in that awful kitchen. Suddenly this person was in the room with me that had no business being there. And I screamed and threw the book. So that there is no higher praise, right? That's as high as it gets.
Yep.
Let's see. So, you mentioned Shirley Jackson, horror anthologies, and Rice. I'm kind of in my mind setting part of what you said about Shirley Jackson aside for a reason that I'll explain here in a second. And this comes up often in our interviews, particularly with creators in the business, because I think there's a difference between being a fan of something at the emotional level, and then there's also being a fan of it as a creator. There's the auteur part, and then there's the emotional part. You know what I mean?
Right. And you're reading it. You're reading it or taking it in on both levels at the same time.
Right. But the focus of this call, we have found, seems to get more at the heart of it when you focus on the emotional part of it than the auteur part of it. You know what I mean?
I don't know if you can separate it out. If you're
sometimes, go ahead.
No, I don't. I'm just in my own experience. I don't think it's no longer possible. I've been wearing this hat for so long that my head is actually shaped like the hat. Yeah, it's impossible to be able to step away from the making of it when you're a maker, because part of you is always watching which is why the Sarah Waters book made me laugh in delight at how well she had fooled me, right? At how well I had followed her, up the garden path and how flawlessly she did it. I don't know if I would have laughed at that moment if it wasn't something that I also aspired to do. I might have been appalled by what she did and by the way the story had turned at that point, right? Because it's a very, it's not good what's happening, but it made me laugh and delight because she did it so well. I mean, the same with Pan's Labyrinth, the same with anything that I really love. Part of me loves it because it's so beautifully made. And I'm in awe of it when it's really well made. And I like to, you acknowledge that, even as you're watching it, because a part of you is always, there are two of you watching it, eating the same bag of popcorn, but two of you nonetheless.
Anything else in your teenage years jump out at you?
I'm trying to think. I remember watching the first Alien movie in a theater.
Nice.
And that's another film that holds up and holds up and holds up. And of all the, the movies in that franchise, I think it's the only one that reaches a level of art in the sense of it will always have something to say and always have something to give if you can come to it.
You brought up Anne Rice in interview. You'd mentioned the thing about the strong narrative. Was there anything else about it that you liked other than that?
It was the first time I had ever seen a child as a vampire, a child created to be a vampire as, and in the story, Claudia is made a vampire to try to retain some hold over Lewis. And it works for a while. But I thought that was so brilliant that this is a person whose experience of the world, I mean, any, in that mythos, any vampire is sort of frozen at the moment of their creation. They will never age. They will never, they are that until they're either that or nothing, but they don't grow in that sense. They're eternal stasis, which is why I understand why vampires would go mad, because if you have eternal life without eternal growth, wow, that is a recipe for unhappiness. But that this child, this person, this entity would always have to live in the body of something that is completely helpless was, I thought, just a fucking masterstroke.
Yeah, that's one aspect of it I didn't even really think of so much. You always think of the cheat or the unfair hand that she's dealt, and the fact that she will never go through certain stages of life, and she'll never grow up. She's just perpetually a child. But also the physical aspect of it. That's gotta suck. You're gonna be this short for the rest of your life. You're gonna be physically overpowered by everyone who's larger than you for the rest of your life. Like, just there's no hope.
You either have to kill them or let them do what they want with you. If you don't want to blow your cover, you have to, go along and be a kid. Yeah. And there are places where a kid shouldn't go or shouldn't be found, right? And especially since this is like a nocturnal creature, most little kids are not out on the boulevards at 2 a.m. No, they're really not. Or they shouldn't be, right?
It's dooming her to a very complicated and just really annoying life, I would imagine.
Right. And it was done as an act of, that's, people do this to children all the time. They make them do things or they make them participate in things that, well, we all decided we're moving to Arizona now. Well, nobody asked me, tough, get in the car. You're at the mercy of things that are bigger than you. And even though she's a killer, it also, I don't want to say warps, but it also directs her cruelty in a very dark way once she realizes, this is it for me. I'm never going to be. There's a moment in the story where Lestat, she's plotting to kill him. Spoiler alert, but she's plotting to kill him, and she says, I have a gift for you in the next room. And he says to her, I hope it's a beautiful woman with endowments you'll never possess. And that, I mean, he's turning the knife in several ways there, right? And it isn't only that she will always have a child's body. She will always, she can't grow. But it's throwing that in her face, right? It's like, I made you the little monster that you are, little monster. So she had her own plans, and they worked for a while.
Yeah, Lestat was not a very nice person or character.
And that's what's so disturbing. I mean, that the same as Pan's Labyrinth, and that the depiction of real cruelty is far more, to me, that is something in horror I almost can't watch. There's a film called Son of Saul that came out, I want to say it was before the plague, I'm not sure, maybe 2019. And in it, it's set in the Nazi death camps, and the main character that we follow is convinced that his son is present in one of the camps in, I don't want to spoil it, but in a certain capacity. And the entire movie is about him trying to find out. And if that's true, what can he do about it? And the depiction of cruelty is so stark and so, I don't want to say dreamlike, because that makes it seem, it was very dreamlike. It's not dreamlike. It's
Surreal?
dreamlike almost, to the sense of, you understand that these are things that happened, right? And you understand that all these things are true. But to the person experiencing them, there's a part of you that is, I don't want to say
latching onto it.
or so, right. You're not even numb. You're at a point where, if I'm going to survive, I have to make some kind of accommodation with this daily, tsunami of evil. I will never forget that movie. I don't know if I could watch it again, right? But I'll never forget it.
It's interesting whenever I talk to somebody who, as you say, you wouldn't classify yourself as a fan of horror, but there's a lot of things that we've been talking about here that are in that genre, but yet there's this thing that is uncomfortable to you.
Yeah, and that's across the board. That's in any work of fiction or work of art or movie or whatever. Cruelty is a very awful thing to contemplate. It's almost, I don't know, it's like an abdication of, I wouldn't say humanity. That's why when people say, "Oh, the cat is so mean," it's chasing the mouse. That's a different level. That doesn't have anything to do with kids. These are animals being animals, right? They don't. That's different. That has nothing to do with this kind of planned and willful enjoyment of someone else's pain.
So maybe it's the enjoyment aspect of it, because, for example, Dracula, I don't know. Well, I mean, Dracula might enjoy his food, but it's not the same thing as enjoying your pain. You know what I mean?
Right. And even though, it was really interesting when I sat down to adapt Dracula for, the submersive event, I went through the book to, comb out his actual words, all the speeches that he makes in the book. And there are damn few of them. If you go back and look, he doesn't say that much. And that made it a challenge to try to, how am I going to represent what this character is about by using his own words when there are so few of them? And yeah, I don't think of him as enjoying. It's not the same. There is certainly a cruel aspect there, but it's almost, I want to say, it's almost a class aspect too, because he does go on and on about those boyars and how, the peasants and blah, blah, blah. And there's a big class aspect in Dracula too.
I think my take on cruelty is it is disturbing when, and this is all eye of the beholder too. I mean, it's all, under your own interpretation, but whether it's pure or mindless cruelty, or rather just cruelty for someone who is undeserving of it, that is definitely an unquestionable reaction of dislike and discomfort. Whereas you do have other types of cruelty, like say you have a revenge horror movie or a revenge movie of any kind. You almost enjoy seeing that cruelty when it's enacted upon the people that have already done cruel things, but they've done cruel things to people that don't seem to have deserved it. So it puts a blanket or a wrapper of acceptance around this cruelty, because now it's retribution. It's not cruelty.
Right. And there's an aspect of justice in there too, eye for an eye, where you go, okay, yeah, but you can also, that's quite right, what you're saying, because you can also examine that and go, well, I'm enjoying watching this person, the baddie is getting tortured to death, and I'm here for that. Where's my empathy? right?
Yeah.
Why am I liking this? Why is it okay for this to happen? I mean, yeah, he's bad and he, destroyed the world and all, but it's still, is this necessary? How about we just do a headshot and call it a day?
Yeah.
Right. But no, no, we're pulling out his fingernails. But yeah, it's justice, but it is also revenge.
Well, Chris brought up justice and revenge, but I want to go back to the difference between like Dracula versus that Holocaust movie. You brought up almost casual versus, I don't know what you would call the other one, intentional,
systemic,
malicious.
right? Like a systemic apparatus of cruelty, and within it seems to give people the freedom, or it pretends to offer people the freedom to act any way they fucking well please, right? It's like, I am seeing the people who run this camp treat you guys as lower than dirt and non-human. So I guess I can do it too. I can do whatever I want.
But isn't systemic also casual?
No, not at all. I don't think.
No, systemic has a purpose. I mean,
systemic has a reason.
It can be casual in the fact that you're just passively following orders, if I can use the term.
Right. That's the cliche,
you're just doing
right?
as the rest of the sheep are doing because it's easy. You don't have to make a decision because my compatriot is doing it, so I'm going to do it.
And because it makes me less culpable, right? Gosh, everyone was doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just
or
me.
To not even view it as being, or not even view it as being cruel, is just to say, well, I'm just following the rules.
Right. Or I'm just following orders. I mean, there's a part of you that wonders, and it isn't even the people who were participating in the hands-on cruelty. It's the people who stand back from it and are like, la, 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 la. We don't talk about what happens, over there in Auschwitz.
And I may have misunderstood your earlier description of the Holocaust movie in that I thought you were saying that there were individuals specifically being intentionally cruel, not just because they were following the system, but because of whatever personal motivations they had.
But that's part of it too, right? I think that is part of it. And we're seeing a little bit of that writ much smaller, but with deadly consequences as well in the behavior of people who won't act to mitigate the plague, right? It's like what I want. I've been told that I have good reasons for feeling the way that I do. And so I'm not perhaps examining my behavior. I'm saying you don't have a right to tell me I can't be free. And so whatever happens to you happens and I don't care. And in some ways that's been the most shocking aspect of all of this, is watching how many people just don't care about other people. They demonstrably don't give a shit. That's extremely disturbing. I mean, I knew we were a bad species, but wow.
Giving a shit takes too much time these days. No, nobody got time for that.
I guess not, because they have things to do, right? They don't have to care about, your elderly mom or your 3-year-old for that matter, right? It's like, get out of my way. I got to go do whatever it is I do. Yeah, that has been amazing. A bunch of people have pointed out that in the movie Contagion, the climax is how now the vaccine has been developed and how everyone is excited to get it. And, wow, this is the thing we've been waiting for. Never once did I expect that people would react to this by not wanting to participate in something that would stop it. I was blindsided. Never saw that coming.
Agreed. But, the last couple times this kind of thing happened, I haven't done any research on this, so I can't say, but, I don't think those vaccines were created as quickly as the current ones are. Not to say that I don't trust them. I've been vaccinated. I do trust the science, but, that argument couldn't have been made the last time around is what I'm saying.
And there have always been people there were people who would not have their children vaccinated for, MMR vaccines but the burden was always on them to remove themselves from the population. It's like, well, your child can't go to school without these normal vaccines, so you'll have to make other arrangements, rather than say, no, my kid is going to go to school. And if my kid gives your kid measles and your kid dies, oh, well, I'm still free. Yeah. That I'm wondering too, how much of this
amazing abdication of responsibility.
It just, especially when, it's like my kid is what matters and not yours. That I'll be very interested to see, although I will probably never watch them, all the films that will come out and the art that will be made looking at this pandemic or looking at the way people behaved. Or
I mean, zombie movies from today moving forward will never be the same.
Right, exactly. This has changed us all in ways that we can't begin to grapple with, right? So, and I mean, that goes back to what we were saying about trauma too, right? Where this is a global trauma that we've all experienced in different ways, but you don't go back to normal. Normal is different now because you're different. So it's like when people would come back from wars and they'd say they have shell shock. In a way, that's kind of what's great about humans, is that we don't really like going to war and slaughtering each other. So it gives you problems afterwards, which sort of speaks well to us as a species, I guess.
Some of us, anyway.
Some of us, yeah. Some of us.
It's a spectrum. Speaking of trauma,
can we go back and talk about Halloween?
Yeah.
Did anything traumatic actually happen to you in your teenage years?
Oh,
that you want to talk?
Again, in a broad sense, let's say, I think which is also why I loved writing YA. The teenage years are times of such intensity. Even for a benign example that we've all gone through, when you have first love, you don't know there's going to be second love. And so if that doesn't work out, it really feels like the end of the world, right? Like, oh no, I had this thing and now it's over. Oh shit. Now what? Oh my God. And it in hindsight, you look back, but at the time, those feelings are quite intense, right?
Yeah, and when you're in your teenage years, everything is traumatic.
Everything's turned up to 11. And there's that sense of, and I don't know what it's like for young people now, with all these different incredibly awful things looming over them, but that sense of possibility that other things can happen that are than the things that are happening to me now, for good or bad. That's huge when you're young, and you're starting to have more agency too. So it's not like you're able to plan and to do things and to, enact your will on your own life in a way that you couldn't when you were small.
Would you say any of these traumas that you experienced in your teenage years changed your behaviors moving forward?
Probably not.
Not in a meaningful way, anyway. So moving to adult years, you had already mentioned the Sarah Waters Fingersmith. I think you said that you had read that in your adult years.
Yeah.
Anything else that jumps out at you as being really impactful during your adult years now? Maybe
I
top
don't know.
three?
I'm trying to think of a good example. The HBO series Deadwood, my husband and I watched it, and I remember getting to the end of the first episode and we looked at each other and we're like, is there more of this? How do we get more of this? This. And it was so much all of a piece that the books that I wrote after seeing that, I wrote a trilogy about Victorian puppeteers called Under the Poppy. And I'm sure that just the wonderful interlocking construction that David Milch created with Deadwood has, Under the Poppy owes a tip of the top hat to, because it's like, you made your thing, I'm going to make a thing too. I'm going to make my world. And they're not the same, but what I loved so much about that series, and especially as a period drama, it gives you the feeling of how it might have been to live life in that era, because it isn't only, actually, another, Tom Hardy's Taboo does it too. It gives you the feeling of reality. You don't feel like you're watching people put on hoop skirts, right? It's like the reality was so intense. in that series, and to a lesser extent in Taboo, which I don't know if that's ever coming back. That was a great 2-season series. That kind of reality, I think we're always looking for. I know I'm always looking for when I'm trying to make something. I want to make it as real to the shared experience of being human as I possibly can, because that's where, that's where you're going to meet the reader. That's where you're going to meet, whoever you're trying to have this conversation with.
I've been looking back through our conversation, the notes I've been taking, trying to look for, common themes. And I'm starting to see one, other than some of the things that we've already talked about, period dramas seem to be a theme for you.
Yeah. I don't know, I guess. Probably in the sense of worlds that are meticulously created. I mean, that's what was also so great about the first Alien film. It wasn't like, spacemen and pew, pew, pew. And it was these people on this fucking ship just doing their jobs, right? It wasn't anything exciting. They weren't searching for bold new worlds. They were doing their damn jobs.
And it was understood because it was very in-depth world building.
Right. And you felt, okay, these are just people that are trying to get to the end of this, stint and get paid. And they squabble about being paid. And there's a hierarchy on the ship too. And it's so well done because it's so completely a world that you believe every single thing that happens. And that's why you can believe in the things that are not, real. You can believe in
things
the
that
monster.
are period dramas or period pieces. I guess it gives it that much more entertainment and credibility because you have no choice but to have a very in-depth world building in a period piece because you have to recreate almost 100% of it.
If you're doing a good job. I mean, we've all seen things where it's like, oh, this is supposed to be set in this time. And you're like, nah, I don't. I mean, you have the costumes and stuff, but the feel is missing. I just don't buy it.
What's that Starbucks cup doing over there? I mean,
I know, right? Could you please?
Yeah, it's hard to do period pieces.
Well, it is. I was going to say it's a way to set up certain rules. We talked earlier about, childhood games and adhering to rules or throwing them away. This is a way to say, okay, here's some ground rules, and then go from there.
Yeah, that works great in horror. I mean, if you set a movie in, say, 1980 or earlier, no more worry about cell phones. They're not even a thing yet.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Agreed. So I'm going to skip past some of the other adult questions, jump down to the wrap-up questions. There's still a few of these, but these cover your entire life and are not just about horror. They could be about any genre. So the first two questions I'll give them both to you at the same time because the answer could be the same for them or it could be two different answers.
Okay.
The two questions would be, what is your favorite movie? Or in your case, if you want to give book, that's fine too. And then the other would be, what movie or book have you watched more times than any other or read?
Wuthering Heights, I've read more probably than any other book. What film have I seen more than any other film? I don't know. I'm not a huge rewatcher of things. Although I did just rewatch the new Macbeth. I had seen it and then I watched it again because I wanted to hit some of the beats again. Oh, I'm failing at these questions. I have to press the buzzer. Next question.
To go back to one for a second here. So where I said, which one have you watched more times than the other and which one is your favorite? Would you say Wuthering Heights would be your favorite book or is there something else that you would say is actually your favorite, even though you've read that one more?
It is really hard to say. Some books I go back to. Ridley Walker is another book that I love a lot, and I always get something from it when I go back. It's probably the best dystopian. It's for sure the best dystopian novel I've ever read. The concepts are very complex, but the way that he tells them is just, the narrative just drags you along. Russell Hoban, he's one of my favorite writers. Yeah, I always freeze up and like 10 minutes after we're done, I'll go, oh man, why didn't you say this? Oh man, what about that? How could you forget that?
That's why we go through this in stages, because of exactly that kind of thing.
Because another book that I love a lot is Anthony Burgess's A Dead Man in Deptford, about the poet and playwright Christopher Marlowe. It's just one of the most beautiful books that you will ever read. The language is fantastic. The way he uses language is just, wow, it's a gift. And I've read that multiple times. And the book of his, everybody knows, is Clockwork Orange, right?
I do recognize that name.
Never heard of it.
Let's jump back for a second, because, for example, with both of these, Ridley Walker and A Dead Man in Deptford, you mentioned the things that you like about them as an auteur, but what's the emotional impact on them?
Oh, it's very different, but in the end, it's an individual trying to not just grapple with their world. They're both very gifted people, and we see it coming out in Ridley when he starts using the puppets. The puppets are involved, and there's a great scene in the beginning of the novel where they go out to the diggings, this excavation. They're like excavating the ground, I guess, to see what they can literally dig up, what they can find. And he finds this little figure, and he knows it pertains to him in some way, but he doesn't understand how. And when the foreman of the digging says, because they're not allowed to keep the shit they find, and it's like, what do you got there? What do you have there? And instead of giving up this thing, Ridley literally throws the guy into the mud headfirst and runs away and leaves everything behind. Leaves literally everything behind, his home, his way of being, everything, because the pull of this thing is so strong, and he doesn't understand it, but he knows that it belongs to him. And Marlowe, in that sense, was he was a poor man's son, a cobbler's son, and he ended up being able to go to university at the 11th hour. He was much older than the other students in his school, and here's this person who had this gift. He had this gift of poetry and of words and pageantry, and it's about how do these figures operate in this difficult world that they live in, and how are they able to exercise their gifts despite all the tribulations and all the problems that come upon them while they're exercising their gifts, and sometimes as a direct result of doing so. And the language in both of them is so beautiful and so precise and well done that it's how can you not love it?
So the next question is, do you see any kinds of common threads about what kind of horror you like? Cannibalism, occult, metaphysical.
That's quite a menu.
Yes. It's the sampler.
It's the tasting menu, right?
Yes.
You did mention hunger earlier.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's what I'm doing right now. Is I'm scrolling back through the notes I've made, seeing if I can find a common thread.
Yeah, I don't know. Probably you'd be able to see it better than I would. I'm probably too. It's probably too close to me, right, to be able to see. I don't know.
Well, I'm seeing some common themes, but not particularly related to horror, because we haven't really dug into horror, I don't feel, as much in this call. Going back to the themes, though. So, I mean, very early on, you mentioned, shock of injustice and not to trust authority. Also similar with Dracula, there's the authority, the power structure there, and humans not being at the top of the food chain. Unreliable narrators come up, which could also kind of tie in with the not trusting authority in certain situations. You've mentioned multiple times liking a strong voice. I guess maybe we could dig into that a little more for a little better explanation of that. Is there something special about that really that you key into?
I don't know, but this is super interesting to listen to. I must say, it's truly like therapy. It's like, oh wow, okay. Probably the strong voice is the thing that I follow in any piece of art, in music too. And I want to know that there is an individual mind behind, or a collection of minds, but individuals behind created work. And because I tend to trust individual voices more than say, a corporate voice. So maybe that goes back to, distrust of authority. But the same way that, big tentpole movies usually are not for me, because no matter what director you have, you generally have to hew to a particular viewpoint. And it is not necessarily shaped by the narrative. It's shaped by commerce. So, yeah, that's not as interesting.
Well, there could be something here that may have tied in with something you said earlier. So when I think about what you just said, I want to know that there's an individual voice behind a piece of work. To me, that almost sounds like you're saying, I want to know what it is you're trying to tell me. And this is opposed to what we talked before about, active vagueness versus passive vagueness. And also, I think, struggling to find the words here, you mentioned like a dialogue between you and this other artist where they're trying to get you to think about something. And you can't have that dialogue or have the thought if you don't know what it is they're trying to tell you.
Or if you don't know that there's the same way that you will trust a friend telling you a story. And if your friend comes in and starts telling you this, this wild tale, you trust the teller. So you're not immediately going to say, oh, that's bullshit, or what do you mean? Or, if they say, wait, just let me tell you, you're going to sit and listen because you trust the voice that's telling you things, right? So maybe that is part of it. The idea that there needs to be a storytelling voice behind all the media that I'm liking. I need to know that I'm being told a story by a particular entity.
And what I was saying is it's not just about the story, but the interplay between you and the story.
And which leads back to the teller, right? Because that's the unseen third in the room. It's like we're reading the book, but the writer is there as well with us. Whether they're living or dead doesn't matter. They're still there because or the director or whatever, that's the particular mind that set this thing in motion. And that's who you're really having the dialogue with.
Right.
When you're reading Wuthering Heights, you're really having a dialogue with Emily Bronte.
I didn't say this earlier, but when we first started talking about some of this stuff, it occurred to me that I thought, I bet you probably don't like movies that are just like a slice in the life of, if there's no story implicit in that. Like you can do a slice of life story that has a story in it, or it can just be a series of unconnected events that mean nothing.
Right. I get, and that part of that is just my own narrative engine is always, idling. It's always ready to roll. And then I start trying to impose narrative on things if it doesn't have any, and that, that way lies madness. So you can't rewrite something or reshoot something. It would be harder for me to engage with because I think in terms of narrative.
The next question here is then, why horror? I think that we've already mentioned that these things aren't really tied to horror for you, but it sounds like the engagement is the key element of it for you.
Right. And especially in a really good horror film or a good horror novel, you are more willing to go into those extreme situations if you're following that strong voice, right? You're more inclined to be open to what you're reading or what you're seeing.
You just said a word that made me think of the word, or I don't know if maybe you did say discourse, but I'm thinking that might be a better word than engagement. Discourse.
Better in the sense of
describing what it is that you seem to have been getting out of all the things that we've been talking about, all the different media, movies and books and things that we've talked about, and what you like in them. It's engagement, yes, but it's also the discourse of ideas.
And it's both too, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be either or. You need to have engagement to start with.
Right.
Otherwise the ideas they'll just sort of be academic. They won't mean as much to you. And if there's nothing behind it but pure sensation, that's okay for a minute, but your narrative mind wants more. My narrative mind wants more.
It's not in our list of questions here, but the thing that's coming to my mind then is, well, then what's worth talking about?
Nothing. Nihilism wins.
Well, thank you very much for having me. This is really a lot of fun.
I mean, what's the
Trump
point
card,
of
slam
thing, really?
Right. Well, yeah, and that's the point of art too. That's why I think one of the greatest pieces of art that has ever been written, and I am not fooling, is the Velveteen Rabbit. And if you don't remember the Velveteen Rabbit from when you were small, or if, like me, you never read it till you were an adult, and I was reading it to my own son, there's a line in it that, and the Velveteen Rabbit is this toy rabbit that this kid has and loves and plays with and stuff. And one day he's playing outside, and the Velveteen Rabbit sees like real rabbits running around, and he sees there's something different, about him and them. He understands that they're not the same. And he asks one of the other toys in the nursery, what is real? And the rocking horse explains to him and says, well, when you've been loved for a long time, and maybe some of your fur has rubbed off, or you don't look quite as pretty as you did, but that love makes you real. And at the end of the story, the little boy becomes ill with scarlet fever. And the doctor says, oh, you have to take all his bedding and stuff and all his toys and burn them. Take them out to the trash heap at the bottom of the garden and burn them. And the Velveteen Rabbit says, what is the use then of becoming real if it all ends like this? I can't think of a better existential question for anybody, right? What is the use of becoming real if it all ends in, a fire at the end of the garden?
I particularly like how that ties back in with Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah. What's the use?
What's the use of defending this house and keeping the people alive when you're just going to be shot by a stupid misunderstanding in the end anyway?
Right. Why, when some fucking racist is going to put one in you just because your head happened to pop up like he thinks it's a shooting gallery, right? Just shooting anything that moves, but it extra points if you're black. Yeah. And that the best art is asking those questions, right? Like, what's the point?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's my answer to the question is the asking of the questions. Like, you can say, what is the point if everything comes around and it's all moot anyway, and in the grand scheme of things, there is no change or effect from your actions in the grand scheme of things. I guess the point is the experience.
Right, or that why in the face of that nihilism why would we care? Why would we try? Why would we, try to become real to a little boy if it all ends like that? Why would we even, does that negate what the guy did in Night of the Living Dead, that he saved all those people? I mean, does that negate the goodness? No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
It doesn't, but it negates him not
it
doing
sure negates him.
Yeah.
And then but that gives you the contrast too of this act of, wanton, stupid. It isn't even cruelty. It doesn't even rise to the level of cruelty, right? No. It's just boom, okay. It's this stupidity, this human stupidity and malice juxtaposed with everything that he's gone through to try to help people. And it asks you, well, what's the use? Is it better to be good than not to be good? Is it better to be loved and real or not? What matters? Does it matter?
Debatable.
Well,
yeah, but it
is debatable.
But that's what, like we're saying about discourse, right? Mm-hmm. That's great. Then that takes you back to the discourse.
Yeah, I think, at least for me personally, it is worth doing. There's lots of different reasons why it's worth doing, but as you say, the laying out of those and discussing them is the discourse part of it.
And that's what really great art can do for us, right? It can involve us emotionally in the discourse, so it becomes as real to us, right, as if it was something that really happened.
So if we were to sum up this call, I guess we could sum up into that one word, discourse.
Discourse and discourse and engage. Can we put a / discourse / engagement? Sure. Engagement / discourse. Ooh. And the / can be for horror too. So we got everything.
Yes. Yeah. Last question, considering the theme of the podcast, is there anything relevant that you're aware of that we haven't asked about?
No, this was great. This was almost, it was like a journey that we took. This was fun. I hope you guys had fun. I did.
I did.
I have. Spot to pitch. Anything you want to pitch before we wrap up?
Oh yeah, totally. Everybody must go immediately to darkfactory.club. And that is my new immersive fiction project. The novel of the same name, Dark Factory, comes out in May of this year, but the narrative has already started on the site via There is storytelling there. There is some music. There is some video. There's all kinds of things going on.
I see antlers.
And-
Cool.
Is there Wendigo
Oh
action?
yeah. There's heavy antler action.
Yeah.
So it's a way of taking immersion a step further for me in my work, and I'm very excited about it. Meerkat Press has been a wonderful collaborator across the board in making this come real, and I haven't seen anyone do anything quite like this before. So if I am a pioneer, I'm very happy about that, and it's been a ton of fun. And we are just starting. So we have some live launch events planned for later in the year. And fun will be had there. And there will be antlers. There will be lots of antlers.
We'll put together a bio for you, and we can link to that on your bio page if you like.
Thank you. Yes, I would appreciate that.
Yes. So thank you again for your time. It's been a pleasure. And thank you to anybody else out there listening. Again, please do come visit us at horrormakesushappy.com. We've got links to our social media accounts there, and really the best thing you can probably do is just spread the word. Let other people know about us if you like what we're doing.